The pod door slammed open with a hiss, and a low mist spilled out onto the deck of the Kirellian medical frigate. Inside, wrapped in a trauma cocoon made of transparent gel and synthetic mesh, was a man whose face was swollen, blood-crusted at his temple, and hair matted with dried plasma. Dr. Veln, a tall, quadrupedal being covered in slate-blue scales, leaned over the human's cocoon with two of his three eyes narrowing. He tapped the side of the pod's monitor twice and let out a low sigh. Cerebral trauma, he muttered. Intracranial bleeding, midline shift. Human neurological failure is inevitable. The assistant drone beside him beeped. No resuscitation protocol. Not yet. His vitals are stable but unconscious. Deep coma. There is no indication of cortical activity significant enough for waking cognition. The drone hovered closer to the pod's display. I'm aware humans are unpredictable. That does not mean this one will rise from a catastrophic cranial impact, as if nothing happened. Inside the pod, the human's name flickered on the screen, Yarik Sanders. Age, 37. Assignment, civilian engineer on the joint mining outpost at awakens. Yarik had been pulled from the rubble of a collapsed mag lift shaft after a seismic rupture. He'd been unconscious for 34 hours. The Kirellians had stabilized his bleeding, reduced the cranial swelling, and cooled his body to limit neurological degradation. Veln had done everything required by interspecies medical protocols. He had even gone beyond, installing a cortical stimulator to monitor for any irregular surges in brain activity. There had been none. Veln turned away from the pod and began updating the medical terminal. He was halfway through a report to the Interstellar Medical Arbitration Board when a deep, gravelly voice behind him mumbled, "Is there any bacon?" The stylus Veln held clattered onto the floor. He spun, two of his arms instinctively raised for defense, though Yarik had barely moved. The human's eyes were half open, unfocused, but clearly awake. His left arm twitched as if trying to scratch an itch, and his lips parted again. Or eggs. I'll take eggs, too. Scrambled's fine. Veln staggered back a step. You were in a coma. Yarik blinked slowly. That sounds about right. You suffered a severe cranial injury. Your cerebral matter was displaced. You should be dead. Yarik coughed and tried to sit up. Feels like I got hit with a train made of headaches, but I'm starving. Stay still, Veln ordered, grabbing a scanner. You should not be speaking, let alone requesting food. Yarik winced as the scanner passed over his skull. Well, Doc, I've always been a little ahead of expectations. Mind telling me where I am? This doesn't look like awakens. You're on the medical frigate Elisar. You were recovered from the mining site 2 cycles ago. You've been unconscious for over 36 of your Earth hours. Yarik's brow furrowed. That explains the dry mouth. Veln stared at the screen in disbelief. The swelling had reduced significantly, but the damage to the left temporal lobe was still evident. Neurochemical patterns were showing irregularities, yet Yarik was talking as if he'd merely taken a nap. I need to run further diagnostics, Veln said, motioning the drone to prepare the secondary scanner. You should be in a persistent vegetative state. Yarik gave a weak laugh and pulled the blanket higher. Sorry to disappoint. I don't suppose there's any coffee on this ship? There is no coffee. There is nutrient solution. Sounds awful. It is not designed for taste. Yarik swallowed hard and gripped the edge of the pod. Help me sit up. I'm not going to puke or anything. Veln hesitated, then supported Yarik's back with a mechanical arm. The human was clearly weak, but his motor control was returning rapidly. As soon as he was upright, Yarik groaned and held his head. That's going to be a hell of a bill. You should not be capable of speech, Veln said, scanning again. You had hemorrhaging in multiple regions. I do not understand how you are functioning. Neither do I, Yarik muttered. But I really need to pee. The next 6 hours were chaos. Veln had to rerun every diagnostic on Yarik's brain 3 times. The human's neural pathways were rerouting around damaged tissue faster than Veln had ever observed. Cortical stimulations showed active recovery and even new growth in some areas. The assistant drone logged every anomaly, sending updates to the central Kirellian medical database, which flagged the case as active anomaly, human neurological resilience. Yarik, meanwhile, was trying to walk. Sit down. Veln barked as the human staggered out of the recovery pod. I've been horizontal for over a day. My legs are useless. Your legs are not the issue. Your brain is still damaged. Feels like a hangover from hell. I've had worse. You are not capable of evaluating your own condition. Sure I am. I'm the one stuck in it. Veln handed him a thin, metallic walker. 2 meters. No farther. Yarik nodded, took a step, and immediately groaned. Okay, that was ambitious. You may have years of rehabilitation ahead of you. Not the first time I've gotten my skull rattled. Football in high school. I had a coach who said anything short of unconsciousness was just a ding. Veln blinked at him. Your species permits repeated cranial trauma for sport? Permits it? We train for it. Veln turned to the drone. Add that to the cultural notes. Yarik took a few more shaky steps, then collapsed back onto the bed. You ever consider that maybe I'm just built different? No. I consider that your species is illogical and medically confounding. Fair. By day 2, the Kirellian Medical Council had convened a remote review of Yarik's case. He should not be conscious, Intendant Suvil declared over the comms. The severity of his injury implies permanent dysfunction. I agree, Veln said. Yet he is not only conscious, he is regaining coordination. Has he experienced memory loss? None significant. He recalls his name, occupation, and even the last moments before the accident. Then this is not a case of mistaken diagnosis? No. The scans are conclusive. His injuries were real. Continue monitoring. If his condition deteriorates, it won't. Yarik's voice called from behind Veln. I'm getting better. Veln muted the comms. You're supposed to be resting. I am. I'm also hungry. Again. You already consumed 3 nutrient bars. They taste like flavored drywall. I need real food. There is no real food aboard. Yarik sighed. I just want toast. Is that too much to ask? By the end of day 3, Yarik was walking unassisted. Veln was now both alarmed and fascinated. He had initiated a full study on human neuroplasticity, pulling data from the interspecies archives. There were scattered reports of similar recoveries, but none as rapid or complete as Yarik's. Yarik, for his part, spent most of the day pacing the infirmary, stretching, and asking for increasingly specific breakfast items. Pancakes. With syrup. Maple, preferably. No waffles. No omelets. There are no chickens on this vessel. Bagels. I do not know what that is. Yarik leaned on the console. You guys are missing out. Veln turned to him. You are recovering from a traumatic brain injury. Your priorities are irrational. Yarik shrugged. Breakfast is important to healing. That is not supported by evidence. Well, maybe your evidence needs some pancakes. The breakthrough came on day 6. Yarik was helping Veln recalibrate the magnetic stabilizer in the medbay mostly because he was bored, and Veln couldn't keep him still. As they adjusted the field emitters, Yarik paused. You ever consider that maybe we're not more resilient, just more used to being broken? Veln looked up. Explain. We get hurt a lot. Accidents, wars, disease. We just figure out how to deal. Maybe my brain didn't know it was supposed to give up. That is not scientifically sound. Neither is me walking around after a midline shift. Veln stared at him. You should submit yourself for long-term study. Only if you feed me waffles. By day 8, Yarik was cleared for low-gravity physical therapy. He still had headaches and occasional dizziness, but his progress was undeniable. Veln submitted a full report to the Interstellar Medical Board, concluding with a single sentence. Human resilience remains biologically inexplicable and deeply unsettling. Yarik, reviewing the report, grinned. That's the nicest thing a doctor's ever said about me. You are not cured, Veln warned. There may be latent damage. I'll take that over being dead. Most species would not have survived. Yarik looked down at his hands. Maybe we're not supposed to. Maybe we just don't know when to quit. Veln didn't respond. He simply handed Yarik a warmed nutrient bar and watched him eat. Yarik chewed, grimaced, and said, still tastes like drywall. But he finished it. The ceiling of the rehabilitation chamber flickered between dull amber and sterile white as the ship cycled into its rest phase. On most days, this meant quiet. Dimmed corridors, slowed routines, the distant hum of systems in low power. But not today. Yarik was flat on his back on an anti-pressure mat, panting like someone 10,000 feet above sea level. His left leg twitched involuntarily every few seconds. A thin sheen of sweat covered his neck and forehead, though the room was kept at a constant 22 degrees Celsius. Dr. Veln stood over him, holding a neural feedback controller in 2 hands, his third tapping through real-time readings. You're exceeding the programmed exertion threshold. I'm not pushing myself, Yarik wheezed. The floor moved. The floor is static. You lost equilibrium during the lateral balance test. No, I swear it tilted. Veln adjusted the feedback controls. Humans routinely experience positional vertigo during neural rehabilitation. It is not the floor. Then my brain owes me an apology. You may lodge a formal complaint with your cerebellum when it returns to full function. Yarik gave a dry cough-laugh hybrid and rolled onto his side. How long was that? 93 seconds. Felt like 10 minutes. You attempted to skip the rest interval again. Your recovery is not a competition. It's not if I keep winning. Veln's upper eyelid twitched an involuntary tick usually suppressed by sedative implants. He ignored it. Your brain chemistry is still irregular. You're pushing past advisable strain. I should sedate you. I'm fine. Just give me a minute to catch my breath and maybe a bucket. You are not fine. You are unstable. Yarik pushed himself up slowly, arms trembling. You're just mad because I didn't stay in a coma long enough for a full paper. There is no scientific paper. This is a medical anomaly. Same thing with fewer footnotes. Veln turned and walked to the console, muting the vitals alarm that had started chirping. You are incapable of respecting limits. I respect limits. I just don't like living in them. You are aware that reckless behavior correlates with poor neurological outcomes. Reckless would be me trying to rewire your console with a spoon. This is just stubbornness. Veln tapped through the neuroimaging data. There's a difference? Barely. The quiet between them stretched, filled only by the soft chuff of the ventilation system and Yarik's slowing breath. Eventually, Veln broke the silence. There are over 300 species in the known registry. None recover from cortical displacement this quickly. I'm not trying to make a point. You are one. Yarik leaned back on his elbows. Is that an insult or a compliment? I'm uncertain. Veln pressed a control, and the floor panel beneath Yarik rose, assisting him to a seated position. You require nutrient replenishment. Your glucose levels are erratic. If this ends with another beige bar, I'll pass. There is a new variant. It is ochre. Spicy beige. Citrus beige. Yarik groaned and let his head fall back. You sure you're not trying to kill me slowly? I lack the patience. They remained in the chamber another 30 minutes. Yarik managed 2 more balance reps, both interrupted by muscle spasms in his leg. Veln documented each incident with terse notes, occasionally muttering to himself in Kirellian, his scales shifting in irritation. Later, in the observation alcove, Veln uploaded the session's data while Yarik sat slumped by the wall, holding a hydration patch against his neck. So, Yarik said, voice hoarse, how long until I'm back to full function? There is no defined timeline, Veln replied without turning. Your condition is unprecedented. You hate not knowing, don't you? I detest variables that elude categorization. Well, welcome to my entire species. I have reviewed 52 human case studies. None are helpful. You should try our emergency room footage from Earth. People staple their own legs shut and walk in for fries. That is not medicine. That is chaos. Yarik smiled faintly, eyes half-lidded. Pretty much. At rest phase plus 3 hours, the ship's ambient lighting dimmed further. Veln gestured for Yarik to return to his quarters. I'll walk, Yarik said. I've got enough muscle tone not to tip over. That was not evident earlier. I'm evolving. Your sarcasm is degenerating. Yarik gave a small wave and staggered toward the corridor. Veln remained at the console, watching the humans gate still off-center, but improving. At rest phase plus 5 hours, Veln received a ping from the ship's internal AI. Subject 473 HU, Sanders, Yarik, has accessed auxiliary fabrication chamber. Veln frowned and opened the surveillance feed. Yarik stood in front of the printer bay, holding a diagnostic wand and squinting at the interface. He tapped a few commands, then opened the material feed slot and inserted something wrapped in foil. Veln activated the comm system. Explain what you were doing. Yarik looked up. I'm making pancakes. That unit is for printing emergency medical tools. Yeah, but it also accepts open source input. You uploaded a non-authorized fabrication code. I uploaded a breakfast protocol. It's culturally significant. That is not a justification. I used inert base matter. No toxins. No biological agents. Just a little protein binder and some grain substitute. You are not a culinary engineer. I don't need to be. I just need the printer to make something that doesn't taste like a recycled towel. You cannot ingest synthetic materials not approved by the ship's bioconsumption protocols. I ran a scan. It's safe. Barely food, but safe. Veln's dorsal spines twitched. You are risking your recovery for starch. I'm risking it for morale. There was a low hum as the printer completed its cycle. A thin stack of steaming, slightly angular discs emerged from the output tray. Yarik picked one up and gave it a sniff. Smells like optimism. Veln disabled the printer remotely. You do not have consumption clearance. Yarik took a cautious bite. His eyes widened. I think I just tasted my childhood. Cease eating. Too late. You are incorrigible. Maybe. But I'm also now 72% happier. Veln ended the comm feed and added a note to the medical log. Patient demonstrates continued disregard for protocol, counterbalanced by apparent psychological benefit. Monitor for digestive disruption. At active phase -1 hour the next day, Yarik was already in the cognitive reconditioning chamber, seated at a neural puzzle console. You are early, Veln noted. Couldn't sleep. Kept thinking about that balance test. You failed it. Right, which is why I'm going to beat it. Veln handed him a small sensor patch. Attach this behind your ear. It tracks cortical strain. Yarik did so without complaint. You ever get tired of monitoring me? Constantly. Yarik launched the puzzle sequence. A series of holographic shapes began shifting in front of him, requiring rapid pattern recognition and spatial reasoning. His fingers twitched as he manipulated the controls. Veln watched the monitor. Your anterior cortex is showing elevated coherence. That is unexpected. I figured out a trick. If I hum while solving, it steadies my focus. That has no grounding in known neuroscience. Didn't say it made sense. Just works. You remain a statistical outlier. Yarik kept humming quietly, eyes darting between shapes. He completed the sequence in under 6 minutes. Veln blinked at the results. That exceeds the Kirellian median. I'm not racing aliens, Yarik said, standing slowly. I'm just trying to get back to normal. Veln paused, then said, define normal for your species. Yarik considered. Being alive despite the odds. Stubborn optimism. Creative misuse of available technology. That explains the pancakes. In the humming. You are not normal. Thanks. Veln sighed and turned to the console. Your progress is anomalous, but consistent. I will submit a request for conditional clearance. Does that mean I can walk the ship? To a limited extent. And if I reprogram the food synthesizer? I will detach your access privileges and assign a chaperone. Yarik grinned. Worth a shot. Veln looked at him for a long moment. You should be non-functional. Your recovery contradicts everything I understand. Yarik shrugged. Maybe your understanding needs a few pancakes. By the 14th cycle aboard the Elisar, Yarik had become a known quantity and unwanted one in most of the ship's designated quiet zones. His unauthorized hums echoed off medical bulkheads. His shoes squeaked through antiseptic corridors. And his habit of testing various alien instruments for ergonomic compatibility had led to 3 minor alarms, 1 lecture from the head technician, and a temporary restriction from all maintenance hatches. Despite that, Dr. Veln no longer tracked his movements with the same urgency. Not because he trusted him, he did not, but because every critical scan, every cognitive test, and every biochemical profile returned with results that made no sense and, worse, stayed that way. Veln stood in the neuromonitoring bay, watching the final cycle of Yarik's recovery logs scroll across the display. Cortical reorganization had stabilized. Localized swelling had resolved. Memory patterns, while erratic in their storage distribution, showed no degradation. He had even reacquired fine motor control in both hands, demonstrated earlier by his unauthorized repair of the ship's hydration dispenser, which had been leaking for 3 weeks and ignored by engineering. Explain again, Veln said, arms folded, why your first action upon full cognitive recovery was to fix a machine designed for fluid delivery. Because it was whistling every time someone used it, Yarik replied, perched on the edge of the diagnostics table. And nobody else seemed to care. We considered it a harmless malfunction. I considered it a challenge. Veln exhaled through his secondary spiracle. You were not cleared for technical labor. I wasn't laboring. I was troubleshooting. With precision. You removed a pressurized panel without depressurizing the line. It was a calculated risk. Veln turned to the display, tapping through the final logs. There are no residual abnormalities in your scans. Your brain has resumed standard function by human standards. Your physical reflexes are within baseline. Your equilibrium has normalized. Yarik swung his legs slowly. So I'm cleared. You are not under detainment. You never were. But I'm free to leave the medbay. No more daily supervision. You are discharged from critical care. Yarik grinned. So I can go back to the outpost. That would be inadvisable. I thought you just said I was cleared. You are medically stable. The outpost itself is not. It remains structurally compromised, and the humans stationed there have been relocated. Yarik blinked. Relocated where? Temporary quarters on the orbital habitat. You were listed as non-transferable due to your condition. He stood, stretching his arms. Well, guess I've got some catching up to do. Veln gestured to the nearby console. Before you depart, you must complete a final compliance form. Paperwork. Digital. But yes. Yarik trudged over and tapped at the interface. Language settings? It defaults to Galactic Standard. Got anything with fewer consonants per syllable? Toggle the Earth dialect option. He found it, adjusted the text size, and began flipping through the pages. You guys really love disclaimers. Your species requires them. Yarik scrolled further. This one says I legally acknowledge that I survived a condition statistically considered fatal. That is correct. And this one says I waive any right to sue the Interstellar Medical Council in the event of delayed complications. Also correct. Charming. You are the first human to exhibit such rapid neuroregeneration under observed conditions. Your case will be studied. Sounds like I'll be famous. Only among medical professionals. Even worse. Veln stepped closer. Do you understand what this means? That I'm a freak case? That your survival contradicts over 70% of known neurological recovery models. Yarik finished signing the final screen and turned to face him. Maybe you've been using the wrong models. Veln tilted his head. Clarify. You're looking for consistent inputs. Linear outcomes. But humans aren't machines. We're not predictable. We break weird, and we heal weirder. That is not an acceptable framework for medical science. Maybe not for science. But it's true. Veln tapped his data tablet. Your scans will be anonymized. Appreciated. You will be contacted if follow-up is required. Understood. Veln hesitated, then said, Your recovery was not supposed to happen. Yarik shrugged. Neither was sliced bread. But here we are. Veln's eyes narrowed. I do not understand that reference. Just add it to the cultural archive. Yarik walked toward the medbay doors as they slid open. He paused at the threshold. Hey, document. Veln looked up. You ever seen someone bounce back like this before? No. Do you think it'll happen again? Statistically unlikely. Yarik nodded slowly. Then maybe it's not about stats. Veln said nothing. The human left. 3 days later, Veln filed the final case report. He included every scan, every anomaly, every inexplicable recovery. He triple-checked the data, submitted the logs to the central registry, and closed the file. The system asked him to assign a case classification. After a moment's hesitation, Veln typed, resolved, with human-specific variables. Then, for internal notes only, he added, subject demonstrates a resilience I cannot explain. Not biological, not procedural, perhaps cultural, perhaps behavioral, perhaps a refusal to die simply because no one told him he should. He did not send that part. It remained in his private records. He returned to work. No further incidents were reported.